In this short video, we're going to look at the 3-minute assessment. We're going to look at why to use it. We're also going to talk about which areas of reading we assess when using the 3-minute assessment. And I'm also going to do like a sample passage, and we're going to score it with regard to word recognition accuracy, reading fluency automaticity, as well as reading fluency expression. So, if you would like to have out your 3-minute assessment guide, either the grades 1 through 4 or grades 5 through 8, I'm going to have grades 1 through 4 with me, and I'm going to spend most of my time looking at pages 8 through 12. So why use the 3-minute reading assessments? Well, the authors are strong proponents of the notion of using these quick 3-minute assessments as opposed to formal reading assessments and informal reading inventories, for the sheer reason that they take less time to give, but at the same time capture the same sort of information that particularly informal reading assessments give. Now, those of you that are familiar with giving informal reading assessments such as DRA or the qualitative reading inventory know how long they can take. As a teacher, my school district would block off 3 days for me, 3 days, 3 times a year at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the year to administer informal reading assessments. And it was 9 days of instruction lost because I had a substitute each time, each block of 3 days. So though assessment can inform our instruction, be very rich, it's not a substitute for instruction. And oftentimes giving lengthy informal reading inventories can steal quite a bit of our instruction. At least that's the argument of the authors. And also, the nice thing about the 3-minute assessments is just like an informal reading inventory, they can be given 3 to 4 times a year. If given 4, the authors suggest at the beginning of the year, a couple of times in the middle of the year, I would think probably December and maybe February, and then at the end of the year. So these assessments can be just as informative as informal reading inventories, but take less time. The authors even suggest that for a classroom of 25 students, it could take around 2 hours. However, I guess that depends on your classroom dynamic. So what's being assessed on the 3-minute reading assessments? Well, the first thing is decoding or word recognition accuracy. This is where we can sort of find our percentage with regard to grade level. So we're going to look at independent, instructional, and frustrational grade level equivalents when we look at our passages. And that's kind of a nice piece that will help us determine what book level approximately our students are at, so that we can tailor what we're reading to our students' independent and instructional reading level. The next thing that's being assessed is reading fluency, and this assessment allows for interpretation and analyzation of both automaticity as well as expression. Automaticity is measured in words correct per minute, and as you can see on page 10 of your text, there are target reading rates by grade level, and it's broken up into fall, winter, and spring, and these go up through the 8th grade level. So that will give us some idea as far as reading rate and automaticity. And the nice thing about this assessment is it also gives a multi-dimensional fluency scale, so that we can think about the student's fluency with regard to expression and volume and intonation, and smoothness and pace. And that's a nice feature of this assessment, because as we know, reading fluency is not just looking at how fast a student reads or how accurate a student reads, but we're looking at all those things. We're looking at accuracy, we're looking at reading at a reasonable rate and automaticity, as well as reading with expression. We know that students who read with more expression orally tend to do that while they're reading silently, meaning that they're paying attention to punctuation and how punctuation influences how they comprehend what they are reading. And then the final thing that's assessed using the 3-minute assessments is comprehension in the form of listening comprehension, and that's done by oral retell or oral recall. So the directions are pretty cut and dry and can be found on page 8. They're broken into 4 separate steps, and we'll just go through those very, very quickly. The first step is the student reads passage at grade level. Now I've encouraged you all, or asked you all, to have your students read one at grade level, one below grade level, and one above grade level. Now the text passage that you decide to start with is up to your discretion and up to really where you think at this point your student should start. You can start at grade level, and either depending upon what the score is, whether it's independent or instructional, you can move on to the grade level above. If, however, you feel that the student probably is not at grade level, then you can start with the grade level below. Regardless of which passage you start with, you're going to have the student read the passage for 60 seconds. You're going to follow along with the teacher printed copy and mark any errors. Now, it's important to understand what those errors are. You can find that on bullet point 2 on page 8. The errors are as following. If the student stops at an unknown word and does not attempt to pronounce the word for 2 seconds, or if she attempts the word but clearly has little chance of reading it correctly, tell her the word and ask her to continue reading. However, both of those are considered errors. You can do that by drawing a line through the missed word. Errors also include mispronounced words, as well as words that you provide to the student, and then of course words that the student omits. So we're thinking about student omissions, words that they omit. We're also thinking about words that we provide to the student after 2 seconds, as well as words that are mispronounced. So those are errors. And the text also asks that you consider if the student initially mispronounces or omits the word but self-corrects it, to write and circle a C above the word to indicate that it was corrected and to not count that as an error. And as I said in class, I'd also encourage you to, even if the student omits the word, or has to be prompted after 2 seconds, or mispronounces the word, yes, draw a line through it, but I'd encourage you to write the word that, if it is read wrong, that you would write the word above it, so that you have an idea of if there's a pattern within his or her miscues. So the student reads for 60 seconds, you mark any errors, and then after 60 seconds, you want to sort of draw a line at the word that was last read, and then direct your student's attention to the beginning of the passage and ask him or her to follow along silently while you read the text aloud. Read the passage to the child in a normal and expressive voice. At the end of your reading, remove the passage from the student's view and ask him or her to tell you what they remember from the passage. After she has retold the passage, ask her if there is anything else she remembers about what she read. Oftentimes we can give those students a little bit of wait time to allow them to process it. Wait time is oftentimes one of the best things we can do for a lot of our students, is just to give them a little bit of time. However, if the student is unable or unwilling to retell anything from the passage, you may ask for specific information, such as, what is the main idea of the story? What was described in the story? Now, if you decide to give wait time or any prompting of any sort, if you would please record that in the comments and observations box on your scoring sheet. That will just give you an idea, when you're looking back over the assessment, some of the things that you needed to do in order to help with that oral recall portion of the assessment. So, the first thing that we're going to do with regard to scoring after you've given the assessment, we're going to look at decoding and or word recognition accuracy. So really what we're looking at is we're looking at the total number of words read in 60 seconds and the words read correctly in 60 seconds. And so we're going to take those two numbers, as you can see on page 9 as the example, 86 words read correctly out of 94 words, total words read, dividing it to get some sort of percentage. And that percentage is going to let us know whether or not that grade level passage is on their independent, instructional, or frustrational reading level. So instructional is anything that's 92 to 98%. And the text says that's typically at the beginning of the year. At the middle of the year, depending upon the other factors, instructional may be okay. But anything that's 99 to 100% is independent reading level. That's usually achieved towards the end of the year. And as the text says, with the exception of first grade, which that doesn't really apply to any of us. Next thing we're going to look at is the fluency rate, or the fluency automaticity. In this, we're going to look at page 10. We've got, at the top, we've got the target reading rates by grade level, and they're broken down into fall, winter, and spring. So we're going to look at the winter. And we're basically going to take the words read correctly and see if it fits into the grade level specific, and whether or not our student is on grade level with regard to automaticity. Next, we're going to look at Next, we're going to look at the multidimensional fluency scale on page 11. And this is going to help us interpret whether or not the student was reading with proper expression and volume, phrasing and intonation, smoothness, and pace. So I really, really, really encourage you to look at this multidimensional fluency scale and get to know it prior to giving the assessment. And just as I said, make notations about the recall on the comments and observations portion. While the student is reading, you may want to also make, or after the student has read, you may want to make any notes about fluency expression, any of these 4 categories of fluency expression in that comments and observations box, so that when you go back to score it, you'll have some observational data right there in front of you, and instead of trying to pull it from memory. So we look at the multidimensional fluency scale, and we'll take a look at that in just a second when I do a little example for you. And then the last thing that we score is comprehension. Just like the multidimensional fluency scale, get to know that comprehension rubric. Understand those rating scores and sort of the criteria that go with the rating scores. And as the text notes, 3 or below is considered inadequate but normal at the beginning of the year. 4 to 6 would be satisfactory at the end of the year. Being in the middle of the year, we probably want to look 3 to 4 to see that they are making some progress in that comprehension on their grade level. So, after looking at all those scoring components, let's actually try to go through an example here with regard to looking at word recognition accuracy, fluency automaticity, and fluency expression. So I'm going to do my very best reading and my very best 3rd grade reading voice and ability, and read for 60 seconds. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a timer here so that you can see where I stop. So what I would do is I'd encourage you to read through and try to mark down errors, and then count up how many words I read and then how many words I read correctly. And we'll go through that together here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and let it get to 5:49 and I will read for 60 seconds. Milk is a very nice drink to drink. It is cold and right and tastes delightful. Milk is white like brand new snow. It is white like a kitten named Snowball. Milk is white like a marshmallow waiting to be cooked over a fire. Milk is a smooth drink. It slides down your throat like water in a stream. The cold liquid fills. All right, so I stopped after fills. So I have read 65 words, and I believe that I miscued on delicious as well as refreshing. I self-corrected throat, but I did miss silky. I said that it was smooth, and I believe I got everything else correct. So I have refreshing, delicious, and silky. So I made 3 miscues. So I read 62 words correctly out of 65. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to divide that. 62 divided by 65, it gives me 95%. 95% is going to put me right smack in the middle of instructional reading level for 3rd grade, which I am a 3rd grader. That puts me at instructional, so I'm pretty close to being on target and clearly on grade level as far as instruction. Now I'm going to look at words correct per minute. So I'm going to look at the table on page 10. I read 62 words correct in that 1 minute. Now I look at grade 3 and I see that 62 doesn't quite meet the benchmark for winter, but it's in fall. So what that tells me is that though I'm reading on an instructional level, I'm reading kind of slowly. And then I'm going to look at the multidimensional fluency scale. And I'm thinking that with regard to expression and volume, I'm probably going to give myself a 3 because the text sounded mostly like natural language for the better part of the passage. I did have some expressionless reading when I was trying to decode some of the more difficult and multisyllabic words, but my volume was generally appropriate throughout the text. I'm also going to give myself a 3 for phrasing and intonation. I read with a mixture of run-ons and a few pauses for breath, some choppiness, but reasonable stress and intonation. For smoothness, I'm also going to give myself a 3. I occasionally broke the smoothness of the rhythm because of difficulties with specific words, those more multisyllabic words like refreshing and delicious. I just kind of guessed on those, didn't I? I looked at the initial letter and wanted to make a guess. And then as far as pace, I give myself a 2 because I read moderately slowly. So that gives me an idea as far as sort of looking at the multidimensional fluency scale. And I would say that I have a total of 911, which is, according to the criteria on page 10, that's pretty good for grade level material, and I am instructional at that grade level. So even though I am reading a little bit slowly with regard to words correct per minute, I'm reading cautiously and I'm attending fairly well to the text. So we're not going to go through the comprehension recall because I'm not sure I could ask myself questions because I probably get them all correct. But you kind of get the idea of how to score it and how to look at it. So if you have any questions about administering this assessment, I'm more than happy to answer those questions. Feel free to email me or call me, and we can certainly spend some time in the last 30 minutes of class next week looking at the at scoring this assessment. So I would highly recommend you look through the multidimensional fluency scale as well as the comprehension rubric and just refresh yourself on the directions and be ready to give this assessment next week.